Well, it's interesting right now. There seems to be a considerable amount of interest in the longevity conversation. And there's two aspects of longevity. There's, the length of life, and then there's the quality of life.
Yes.
There's two things that are very interesting. One, I think in the biohacking space that I've observed is essentially a pursuit of longevity out of a fear of death.
Absolutely, yes.
And then there is the pursuit of longevity from, how functional I can be as I age and pass on that wisdom to others, because essentially none of us know, when we're going to make our exit.
No.
So I try to blend both sides of that equation. I think there's a lot of great research coming out of the longevity side. And I've been looking at the various biohackers, and, some of them are saying I'm going to live to be 150 and 180. And maybe that's true. Maybe it's not. I don't know. I do believe it's realistic to approach aging from saying, I can probably, using all the technology that's out there, live a fairly functional life to 100. I always say to live healthily to 100 and beyond. At 100, maybe we can reassess if I make it that far.
Yeah.
And so the pursuit that I look at the longevity equation from is, as a person who has a deep spiritual practice and wants to pass on whatever I learn to whoever's interested in it. But also I have to function in the world as a president of a natural health company who provides supplements and education in combination. And supplements are only valuable if you understand how to utilize them inside of a holistic program. And you know all about that. That's what you've been advocating for years.
Yes.
I'm very interested in some of the work that Peter Attia has been advocating recently. And he did a great project recently that I was really impressed with. He looked at the longevity equation and he said, well, okay, here's my prospective age, and he figures he's going to get maybe in his 80s, sometime 80 to 90 is a good result. And he's cross-correlating that with risk factors and data from insurance companies, and then putting a biohacker. It's like, well, where's my, what's my muscle mass? What's my cardiovascular? And what's very interesting, because I came from the high performance background as an athlete, that's more for maximization of performance, which oftentimes compromises your long-term health.
Yeah.
And every athlete eventually ends their career because they can't physically do something and often have some compounding issues long-term.
Yeah.
And the smart ones seem to start to evolve to this holistic model.
Yeah.
But one of the things that he identified was really powerful. He drew a chart about, here's my prospective age. And he goes, he looks at that model, what's my last 10 years of life going to look like, and how can I function? And when it came to cardiovascular health, which he's I think a world-class expert in as one of the identifying factors as you age and also to have good cognitive function, he said, well, draw that chart out. And this is an importance and relevance factor. And he said, then he took his kids and his grandkids and he wrote them out in a chart, and he looked at his age, his kids' age, and his grandchildren's age. And he said, when you start looking at that last 10 years, wherever that lands, okay, yeah, you might live a little better for yourself or be healthier, but what is the potential impact you can have from that second and third generation?
Mm-hmm.
And it also made me think of native culture. Of course, it's quite common in native culture. They talk about the 7 generations before and the 7 generations after. And I thought, well, how would they come to that conclusion? And I thought, well, it's highly likely that the elders inside of a tribe would actually see the 7th generation kids in physical form.
Yeah.
That's a great model to look at. And so what I've built for myself, and I'm hoping to convert this into an algorithm that's going to go concordant with our book that's coming out this fall, is to look at what are the particular elements that are contributing to a longevity profile. What's your mitochondrial health? What's your muscle mass? What's your cardiovascular health? How do you manage blood sugar? What's your detoxification pathway? So you can imagine those down a left axis.
Yeah.
And then moving to the right side of the curve is, okay, let's look at your genetics and how I'm adapting my dietary lifestyle around that. What is my gifts that come easily? And then what are the obstacles or challenges that I might have? And how do I offset my challenges and enhance my my strengths over the course of time, and I can use, starting with genetics and then your lifestyle components, with your exercise profile, your dietary profiles, how you're supplementing for, risk factors and things like that. And then how do you incorporate biohacking, detoxification, and regeneration techniques that are kind of make up the biohacking world. So for me, it's about blending those, but maintaining my spiritual center, doing that I don't get lost in just making what I call spreadsheet logic.
Yeah, or shortcuts. Constant, so much of biohacking is shortcutting, and that's not, I tell people I don't use the word biohacking. I call what I do bioharmonizing.
Yeah.
Hacking anything is always an injury.
That's one of the reasons why we came out with Bioptimizers as our company, because we're looking at how do I optimize the biology I have?
Yeah.
And in having given time on that spectrum, well, some people have been doing, your kids are integrated right from birth.
Yeah.
But a lot of people that are coming to this equation are 40, 50, 60 years old. They're already compromised.
Yeah.
So then how do I take that person right here as they are now, look at this profile and say, okay, we're going to spend 3 to 6 months on this. We're going to spend another 5 months on this. And then each time we go through those assessments, we then try and address maybe the big inflammatory factor or the thing that could potentially take them out, so that you can have a high quality of life, good range of motion, be physically and cognitively fit, so that you can share the valuable life experience with the next generation and the subsequent generations. And so that's the overarching principle that we're addressing from our company with our new book, and how people can get outside of a tribalistic mentality of this is the only way. Everyone's always fascinated that Matt, my business partner, he's a keto type diet, does very well for him. I'm on the plant-based side, it does very well for me. But each of those diets have limitations, and our opposite, almost polar opposite ways of addressing this equation. We see that as a strength, not as a weakness, because I learn stuff from him, he learns from me, and then there's other people who are in between us and follow a different path. And so it's let's learn those elements, not in a condemnative way, but in an integrated way. Well, what can I learn from the keto people? What can I learn from the paleo people? What can I learn from this person and that person? And try and resolve that, because I never know who's going to be in front of me. And the element that may be detrimental to me is the absolute thing that they need. And I got to try and remove my own biases from that, and treat the soul who's having a physical incarnation without my own personal judgment or opinion to cloud my commitment to service them as an individual. So that's kind of how I look at the whole thing. And Matt and I have been working on this book for, the genesis of it has been over 20 years, but we've worked on it the last 2 years to kind of give a definitive step-by-step guide for people to help use modern science, modern technology, genetic tests, hormone tests, blood tests, all these things that are available to us now that, primarily we're in the realm of your GP or your doctor, and what their methodology is to kind of hyper specialize and give you an increasingly narrow sliver of the truth. And we're kind of inverting that, saying we're trying to expand so you get a broader amount of inputs to get a more clear picture in the end. It's kind of like adding pixels to a digital screen. The more pixels that you have, the higher resolution that you have in your judgments, your positions in what you're doing. And then also being able to have that kind of spiritual Zen space is I'm still open, because at some point in time, perhaps it comes to a point where I have to start embracing eating animal proteins.
Yeah.
Maybe that happens in some point in my life. Maybe there's some element, and if I'm completely shut off from all of these ideas,
it's death by idea then.
Exactly. And that seems to be a common practice that happens to people. You see it all the time. People come in and they're, they've had this thing that's worked for them for 40 years and 50 years, and it's not working anymore. And they're but they're resistant to leaving that behind. And that's always the challenge, I think, to be able to have that beginner's mind all the time, and being able to integrate all the wonderful things that are happening in the world of what I'd say unmitigated science. And that's a whole other topic that we can get into, what's mitigated science and what's real science.
Mm-hmm.
And, recently we've been subjected to this whole narrative, the science is settled. Well, that statement in itself is
anti-scientific.
It's anti-science, because if you understand that a little bit about the scientific method, it's like you recognize that whatever conclusion you have is not the absolute truth. It's a working model. And you're continually trying to disprove that's what's your model that you've built, because you know that it's not a full vision of the model.
Yeah.